All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed your lunch. If we could call everybody back to their seats, we're going to get the afternoon session underway. I think everybody's got the texting down now. We're going to have a little fun, bring folks from both sides of the aisle together this afternoon, and we'll have our panelists take the stage. And we're also going to have Joel and Chris co-moderate this next session. So we'll get things going by inviting Joel Heitkamp and Chris Berg to the stage. Gentlemen.
Thank you.
Chris is going to introduce our panel in just a second, but I want to remind everybody, send your text to 22333, text GNDC space, and then your question. If we don't read it verbatim, it isn't because, well, part of it's because we may phrase it differently, but it helps a lot.
Very well.
Yeah, we don't read really well, and plus the cheaters don't work. Yeah. Also, pound ND Summit as well if you want to tweet. Chris.
We're going to do a quick poll here since we've got these dual moderators. Should Joel be Megyn Kelly today, or should I be Megyn Kelly? So, just kidding. All right, let's get started. We want to talk about really the direction of the state here. Obviously, we know 2016 is just going to be a gargantuan election year. So we've got some special guests here from both sides of the aisle, if you will, to talk about what we're going to do from that standpoint. So right now, the Democrat chairwoman, Representative Kylie Overson, is with us. We can give her a round of applause, please. Senator Tyler Axlis. The Republican chairman, Senator Kelly Armstrong. And 1 month to the day, executive director for the North Dakota Republican Party, Roz Layton. So all four of you, thanks so much for being here. And Mr. Wallace, I'll give you the honors if you want to start with the first question. Or you want to do opening statements.
Well, why don't we? A minute. A minute. With all due respect to Senator Wanzik, who I consider a friend, a minute. We'll begin with you, new Madam Executive Chair.
Thank you, Joel. I just think that in North Dakota, the past 10 years really speak for themselves and what Republicans have done for the state and Republican leadership. We got some numbers from the Department of Commerce. Over the past 10 years, we have created nearly 125,000 new jobs. Average wages have increased nearly $22,000. Per capita personal income is up $25,000 or $25,000 a year. So I really think that Republican leadership speaks for itself, and when you can see those numbers and you can see what Republicans have done for the state.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Joel. As being recently elected to this position has given me the opportunity to travel all around, and we were in Cleveland last week for a summer meeting with the National RNC, and I can just tell you the buzz is exciting for the Republican Party out there. We have a dynamic and diverse group of presidential candidates, and given the way I lean in my political philosophies, we're ready for this presidency to be over. And I also like to always look at the glass half full. So one of the things this presidency has given us as a Republican Party is 31 Republican governors across the country. We control 33 state houses. We control 246 of the seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. That's the highest number since Reconstruction. So there are a lot of positive things going on across the country with the Republican Party, and we hope to carry that energy and enthusiasm through the November 2016.
I'm going to go next to the chair of the Democratic Party. Representative?
Thanks, Joel, and thanks, Chris. And big thank you to John and Andy and the entire chamber and all of you for being here. I'm glad to be up on stage and with all of you today. Everything that Kelly and Roz said is accurate. I mean, we can share the numbers, and I think here in North Dakota, I grew up in the West and I've been in the East for 10 years, and we've seen a lot of really positive, really good things happen in the state of North Dakota. But that doesn't mean we can't aim to make it better every single day and continue to move forward. And whether that's by electing more Democrats step by step, I think there's a lot of really unique opportunities, be it in education and infrastructure, policy across the board. I think we've got a really great opportunity to keep moving North Dakota forward. And I look forward to the conversation on stage today to talk about ideas and how we make that happen.
Senator Axis.
Well, I want to echo the comments of thanking the chamber for hosting us today, and kind of echoing what was just said. Yeah, the numbers are there. We've seen the polls in the state that the majority of the people in the state think that the state's heading in the right direction. But every 2 years, things can change. And I've seen it just play out earlier today when we've heard Republican legislators talking about, well, maybe the slowdown out west isn't necessarily a bad thing. We're starting to catch up. I remember no more than a year or 2 years ago when the previous GOP chair made those comments and was kind of thrown under the bus. So things change over 2 years. We're going to present going forward a different avenue, so to speak. I think what happened last session when we had the revenue forecast change and we started to kind of clamp down on some of the spending that we had proposed, you saw the parties kind of go in their different priority directions. And we're going to highlight that over the next 2 years, investing in people with a return on investment that keeps it in the state versus other priorities of tax cuts that were passed through in the last final days. So we're going to highlight that today and going forward for the next few months.
So if you're going to highlight that, how do you begin to gain some traction? I think we'll talk about some specifics, obviously, from the last election cycle. You look at your top person, Mr. Taylor, got 43% of the vote. The rest were clearly in the mid-30s. I think many people would say you've always got kind of that third, a third, and a third. So you got, obviously, the Democrats to come out. One of the candidates wasn't even on the campaign trail for a month. Still lost that election. So what do you do to start to gain some traction?
I would say we, as a party, are focusing on legislative seats this time around. And we were one of 7 states in the last cycle to pick up a Democratic seat in the election, and we're proud of that. We were also proud that all of the candidates we did elect were women. We, Republicans and Democrats, had the highest number of women serving in the legislature that we've ever had. And I think it's important that the balance that we bring to government is not just partisan, it's gender, it's religion, it's experience, education. We bring a very diverse people who represent the people that live across the state. So I think we're going to be focusing on our legislative races. We've got a few targets in mind. First and foremost will be protecting the incumbents we have coming forward, but we're also looking forward to picking up a few seats across the state.
So with that being said, this is from Mike Jacobs from the Grand Forks Herald, and I think he did a lot of homework on this, talking about Democrats have had the House for, I think it was 10 years, correct me if I'm wrong, over the history of the state, maybe 12, but it's very minimal. And his point was, and this is his quote, and I want to give you a chance to comment on it, he says, "This calls forth another truism about government in North Dakota. If you're not in the tower, you're not at the table." In other words, saying that obviously only the statewide are at the tower, legislators aren't in the tower, legislators aren't. So yeah, you might pick up some legislative seats, but is it really going to do anything for you in the long run for the Democratic Party in the state of North Dakota?
I would take issue with that statement. I think with the way we see the budget process play out, we have our executive branch lay forward a budget proposal, but the legislature, as they should, tears that apart and pretty much starts over and puts forward their own budget proposal. So we have a strong executive branch that's doing a lot of work, but in the end, it's the legislative branch that comes forward and puts forward their own ideas, builds their own budget, and really sets forward that policy.
With success comes problems, and the problem sometimes can be division amongst yourself. Chris mentioned, and I think accurately so, the third. When it comes to elections, there's no question that the Republicans have been picking up those independent votes and winning those seats. But when you get down to the legislative level, and you, for that matter, even get down to governing, whether it's on the executive branch, there seems to be a lot of different philosophies from what some of the people that you've elected as office holders are. And Senator Armstrong, you have to see this when you're in the Senate. Just because you're all Republicans in the majority doesn't mean that you all agree. And my question of you is this. In many ways, when you look at the budget, you heard Representative Carlson earlier say that we've been spending money like drunken sailors, or at least there's that perception out there. Are you really governing the way your party philosophy says you should be governing? And I'm going to direct that to you.
Well, I think we are, and part of the reason for that is, and I tend to lean more on the political spectrum personally of Representative Carlson, but so much of this money is going into building road construction and infrastructure, and we've had 94,000 new jobs in the last decade in North Dakota. Coming from a small rural agricultural state, turning into a real dynamic state with various industries and technologies and energy going, when you have to build out that infrastructure, whether it's in human services or in road construction, the growth in your budget is going to happen. But I do believe we also have to resist the urge, and it's kind of a funny one-liner I always give. How do you make a conservative a liberal? Give them a surplus. So we have to resist the urge to continue this growth. I think the growth as it has occurred over the last 10 years was necessary and needed. I think we really have to, and especially as commodity prices are falling in North Dakota, we have to increase efficiency and accountability in government budgets and keep them under a manageable level.
You say that, but the numbers don't represent it. And I agree with you that when there's money, it's easier. The temptation is certainly easier. But you look at the growth of government, since I left office in '08, it's astronomical. I mean, the FTEs, and some of it's needed. You got to have highway patrolmen out in the oil patch. I get some of that. But you look at the sheer budget, when things get tough, which we could be on the cusp of, does it make you nervous at all that your philosophy that you've been selling people about being conservative really hasn't held true?
Well, I think there's two things too in growth, though. It's the pace of growth and the rate of growth. And the pace of growth has been so exponential in North Dakota that government has to come to react. But I also think that strong policies of the Legacy Fund, the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund, we've been pretty good at, I know this firsthand, we've been pretty good at saving money and putting it aside in a conservative philosophy. As a prime sponsor of the surge bill, I was sure glad we had a SIF fund when we were coming through the legislative session this year, and I know the citizens in Western North Dakota are happy of that. So I think the philosophies we've put in place for conserving money and things, I think we can get through if the budget.
And I would agree with that, but I think most people would say, hey, you know, Joel brought up a great point last session, going all politics is local. I think most of us would agree with that, yes? So what's conservative, what's local about the state buying up 80% of the property tax buy down? I mean, aren't we just taking money from state taxes and saying, no, we're going to buy down your local taxes, but it's just kind of a shell game? What's conservative and what's local about that?
Well, I think property tax is probably the biggest issue we have in North Dakota. It's probably the second most important thing I hear, one of the top two things I hear when I go back local. And I think the reality of the situation is that we have to help the locals to keep the property taxes low. Otherwise, I mean, and as Senator Wardner said earlier, property taxes and the equalization are in the state budget, and we have the money to do it now, and we need to.
But since I've been a little kid, and everybody I've talked to says, look, the biggest conservatives, the best politics is the politics closest to the people. And so what I'm trying to understand is what's conservative about having the state come in and buy up local property taxes or buying those down?
I'm not sure it's the most conservative program in the world, but it is a program that is necessary in order for us to help the local subdivisions cope with the growth.
Okay.
Let me throw this to the Democratic side of the aisle. I've opened up my checkbook and donated to the party that you now chair, and everyone here knows I'm a Democrat. But we didn't beat a tax commissioner that wasn't showing up for work and was drinking during the day. So I know that made upset some people by just putting it that cold and blunt, but we didn't beat them. So what are we doing wrong as Democrats?
It's a good question, Joel. And I get along very well with our tax commissioner. I think he's a good man, and he's done a fine job in his office. Did he face some personal problems? Certainly. I mean, that was left out to air in the public eye. I think the numbers that we have in North Dakota are pretty apparent. We know where the voters are at, and we can't deny that. But as a minority party, our job right now is to continue pushing our ideas forward, and to keep making sure that the voices of all people across the state are heard, whether they identify as Republicans, Democrats, or somewhere in between. That's always the role of a minority party in any government, is to ensure that all voices are heard and respected in the process. And does that mean that we're always going to win the votes? No, unfortunately it doesn't. But cycles turn, and we hope that we will be back on the uptick pretty soon.
Senator Axis, I want your take on that.
Yeah, and I'd like to have some input on that. Many people in here probably know that I was on the statewide ballot last cycle. And what I've noticed, and it's not just when it comes to statewide politics, it comes even to the local legislative districts, are a disconnect sometimes I see between what the voters want in policy and who they're voting for to get in to make those decisions. When it comes to the tax commissioner's race, when you ask the general public, do you support eliminating the income tax on Social Security? I hardly found anybody that opposed that, but they opposed the candidate that introduced that idea. And that's a disconnect that we as a minority party are somehow going to have to figure out and answer that if you want that policy position to become reality and not wait 2 years until it's defeated because it's a party line vote in the legislature, reintroduced 2 years later with somebody else's name on it, we can make those strides sooner if people are willing to start supporting Democrats.
And Joel and I were talking about this during the break. How do you do that? I mean, honestly, you could say the same thing, put an R behind your name, and you'd probably win that seat.
Well, that's obviously an answer we haven't been able to come up with yet. You know, I mean, last cycle, voter turnout was one thing, but it's difficult for us to find that answer. You know, what's the disconnect between the policy and the Republican brand that's been so so effective and successful in the state of North Dakota. We have to find an answer for it.
And I know diversity matters, and you want all people, if you're on the Republican side of the aisle, and I'm going to send this to the executive director, to be welcome. It's a big tent that you want to have it be in. But the individuals that the representative was talking about that got beat in the legislative races focused primarily on social issues. They didn't vote on policy issues. We just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars defending something that any lawyer that just got out of law school could tell you we weren't going to win, just for an ideologue point. My question is, as Republicans, do you pay a price for that? Do you wake up and say, look, it's roads, it's bridges, it's schools, it's not these social issues that they're driving us to? Is your recommendation to your future candidates is to stay out of those issues?
Well, I think that the social issues provide a great talking points for the Democrats because they don't have the ability to pass the roads projects. They don't have the ability to get some of those through because they don't have the members in the House and the Senate that the Republicans do. So I think that's one big thing is they can use these social issues as almost a crutch. And I saw a comment come in that said that millennials are less focused on these social issues and more focused on the fiscal issues. So I would be interested to see if the Democrats lose out on some of those talking points that they have in those headlines that they gather.
Well, you say that, but there wouldn't be milk in schools if it weren't for the Democrats. It took the Democrats and the moderate Republicans to have milk in school. So I'm sorry, I disagree on that. My point is, and that's really what I was getting at earlier with Chairman Armstrong, which was you've really got two Republican parties in Bismarck right now. You certainly have people in the executive branch that are more moderate. Agreed?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, and you certainly have the moderates teaming up with the Democrats to pass legislation. So my point is, as you develop this base with the power you've been given through the name ID, through, as Chris put, you got the R behind your name, you got a way better chance of winning. Are you going to mold it into people that govern or people that cost us money in lawsuits? That's what I'm getting at.
Well, we were talking all politics is local, and that's where local candidates come into play. Our job as a party is to run the machine of the party and to make sure that we help get our Republican candidates elected. But there are many, many districts and many, many Republicans that social issues are very important issues in those districts. And no, we are not going to come in and tell them that they can't have those issues. I'm happy we have a dynamic party. I'm happy we have a diverse party. I'm glad that my party doesn't always agree with me, although there are a lot of times I wish they did. But no, the reality is we will accept anybody who follows with those core agreements, and we'll deal with the consequences of the success.
Chairman Armstrong, this is a question that came in. Again, if you want to text him in, it's 22333 and then GNDC with your question, please. But if I can see it, as a prime sponsor of the surge bills, can Senator Armstrong admit that the bill was a great idea when Democrats sponsored it 2 years before?
I think the great thing about the surge bill is that it passed, and that was the key to the whole issue. I can't speak to running the bill. I was a freshman senator that time. I didn't know much about anything when you get into the first days of this, but I can tell you one of the greatest things about the surge bill that we did when we did it is we started meeting with everybody, getting all the buy-in all the way across the state. And we started almost the day the session ended 2 years prior. So yes, would we have liked to have seen some money prior? And if you're in Western North Dakota, you'd like to see money every day of the week. It's going really good right now. But the deal was not only just who sponsored the bill, but how we got the groundswell of support for that bill.
But I think the question specifically, and like Senator Access alluded to this, was it a good idea 2 years ago then as well?
Well, first of all, I don't think it was the same bill and the money wasn't the same, but I mean, yeah, if you're from Western North Dakota, when you're dealing with infrastructure spending, we wanted some money. We did well in 2 sessions before. We did better this session.
I think Senator Access.
Yeah, I'd like to address that, Chris. During this last session, we heard a lot about policy versus politics. It kind of shouted at us in the minority when we were putting some accountability onto the majority party. But this is a prime example of when politics comes into play. It was a good idea in 2013 when Democrats introduced it. It was voted down, in my opinion, because a Democrat was the one that introduced it. Reintroduced the second time around as a Republican, and then that's what we were hearing is what got it passed. For the betterment of the state, we have to get past that, getting, I guess, the recognition for it, and just get it done when it's right, even if it's the first time and if it's a Democrat that introduces it.
Go ahead.
Just to add another comment, I think we all agreed that the surge bill was necessary and then we needed to get it out as fast as we did. We wouldn't have needed that surge had we passed Representative Onstad's production distribution formula in the last session, which would have allowed more dollars to go back to the local governments right away. Instead of them having to come to the legislature again, they're probably going to have to do it again next session. We're saying up here that local politics is where it's at and that we trust local government. If that's the case, we should be giving them more of these tax dollars to begin with. And we wouldn't have to have this cycle of constantly handing out grant money from the government.
Question comes in and says, isn't Heidi Heitkamp running for governor the only opportunity the Democrats have to rebuild their party? Either one of you.
Well,
Okay, you got it?
Or
Yeah.
Joel, I'll add.
maybe we just need a height camp on the ballot.
Joel just got back from Sturgis and he liked it.
I would say we would love to have our senator run for governor. I can't say that's happening. You probably know better than I do, but I'm going to guess she's happy where she's at right now. I don't think that's the only chance we have to rebuild, though. We've got a lot of dynamic candidates that we're already working on recruiting and training for the next cycle. We had great candidates last cycle. Some of them won, some of them didn't. But no, our party's success doesn't rest on one candidate for the governor's seat.
Senator Ash, this is for you, and you're talking to a group of business people that obviously sit down and they create budgets, and for myself personally, I'm going to presume for these people, so excuse me for presuming that one of the things they love is certainty. If I want to go out and put together my budget for my business, I want to know X is going to generate Y, and so forth and so forth. So when you look at this change in the oil tax extraction, my question for you is it easier to change and focus on North Dakota tax policy, or is it easier to change and manipulate oil prices?
Well, if you want stability, and I think this was said in the debate on the House floor, the only way to create that stability is if the prices are fixed, and we're not ready to go down that road. The bill that ended up passed within the last, waning weeks of the session over 5 days, has the potential to be billions of dollars and lost revenue for the state to invest in those infrastructure projects that we've talked about. What was passed didn't do anything to stabilize that revenue over the rest of this biennium, really. And what we are hearing is we had to get rid of the trigger. We all supported the trigger, or the elimination of the trigger. We didn't support the trigger. We also supported the elimination, and the votes show that. And in fact, what this bill does is create another trigger that once prices, if they ever get back to, I think it's $90, that all of a sudden you're going to be increasing taxes on that. I think it was a little bit of the frightening aspect of the fact that all of a sudden we're looking at a dip in the price. We're worried about what that's going to do to impact over the next 2 years. We only meet for 80 days. I don't know that this is creating as much certainty as what we're hearing from the Republican Party when it comes to taking out that trigger, lowering the rates, because the prices are still going to fluctuate, and that's a global.
But that's what I'm saying. It's much easier for me to go, okay, I know I'm going to be at 10.5%, whether it's at $30 or $89, versus me going, well, if it goes down to this, and I might have to have this, and it's just, that's all I'm asking. In my opinion, go ahead, sir.
And we supported the elimination of the trigger that would have dramatically, or whatever, brought it down to zero if we were on that big trigger. I mean, we could have eliminated that trigger without cutting that tax rate from 6.5 to 5.
Senator Armstrong?
Yeah, I don't think Republicans were willing to eliminate the trigger without doing something. We'd made a deal with industry a long time ago and with the people in North Dakota, and we're going to bring it in. But I think there's an important thing here. Right now, we are the first month into the trigger again. And currently, WTI futures don't get above the trigger until December of 2017. So we were all having this debate during the legislative session. We missed it by a month. But currently, so when you say there's no impact during this biennium, anybody doing a water project that's using the extraction tax, if the current futures are even remotely accurate, there's going to be a tremendous amount of money available that wouldn't have been available without this oil tax reform that got passed this session.
Who made that deal? Who made the deal? The people of North Dakota put an oil tax on. The legislature then got lobbied by the oil industry, and the oil industry came in, and pretty soon we're doing the big wet kiss to the oil industry for triggers. Because, oh my God, you're going to leave the state. Well, you know what? When they leave the state, the oil stays in the state. So here we sit. The oil's still in the state. When it's worth something more, you can always harvest it. It's a one-time harvest. If you just would have eliminated the triggers, because it's quite clear, the former governor of the state of North Dakota, Ed Schaefer, traveled all over the state saying if you don't lower the oil extraction tax, they will leave. And we went through years after that of robust economic activity, and the tax wasn't lowered. And so who made this deal with the oil industry where they get this big wet kiss?
First of all, it's not just the industry. It's royalty owners, it's working interest owners, it's communities in western North Dakota. But secondly, you cannot have a deal that has protection in place and then take it away right when that protection is about to come into effect and just say, sorry industry, sorry group, sorry people, sorry western North Dakota, sorry to everybody who's helped North Dakota grow at this unbelievable pace since 2006. We're going to pull the rug out from underneath you, and you just have to deal with it.
But who made the deal?
That probably was the wrong phrase, but we had a policy and there was nobody on our side of the aisle that was willing to eliminate the trigger without having some support from the industry and the people that have helped grow the western North Dakota.
Speaking about budgeting, again, I think you talk to any of these business owners out here, I'm sure they budget at least once a year. Here we are, as Joel has alluded to today, the budgets continue to grow in our state, and yet we're doing it once every 2 years. Anybody here open to having annual legislative sessions? And if so, why?
I actually voted for that bill when it was in the Senate chamber. I don't know if there was one introduced in the House, partly because of the volatility of the commodities that we're talking about right now. Hearing from certain industry leaders when they're talking about North Dakota becoming a swing state, specifically when it comes to oil production, that for a while we might be at $80 or we might dip down to 30. It's very tough to budget, as you're talking about, for 2 years when you're not certain exactly what's coming in. So I'm in favor. There are some arguments against the annual session that do also make sense to me. I think sometimes we do more harm to the state when we're out here than we do good sometimes. So, but I'm open to it specifically for the budgeting purpose.
It's clear by the questioning that's coming in that people want to talk about national politics as well. We've been talking locally. I'm going to direct this to the Democrats. You have a limited portfolio out there in terms of the choices you're giving, and it appears that the National Democratic Party is limiting the debates. Governor O'Malley today said, you know what, I want debates. Let's get debates going. And I think he's on pretty solid ground with that. I want to talk about Hillary Clinton and whether or not, A, you support her as your candidate, and B, why, if she's the candidate, she won't come out in public and is pushing to not have these debates, because it appears that's what's happening.
Well, I will hesitate to throw my support behind any candidate right now. I think it's too early. I will say I've liked a lot of the policies in the previous work of Secretary Clinton, but I've also seen some other candidates step up and throw out some great ideas. So it's too early to say which candidate I will be supporting. And quite frankly, as party chair, I support what my party supports and who the people of North Dakota within the Democratic Party will support. As to the debates, absolutely there's been some disdain for the schedule that's been put forward by the DNC, limiting the number of debates. I won't deny that. I think several of the presidential candidates' campaigns have said we would like to have more debates, and I think most people across the country would support that. I would support that as well. There will be some pushback. We have a DNC meeting coming up very soon in a couple weeks. We will be absolutely supporting more debates.
And then let me take this the other side, because you've got a plethora of candidates. Everybody, Senator Armstrong, have you announced yet? Are you running for president?
I haven't, but my daughter has.
You might be the only elected Republican in the nation to not announce he's running for president. That being said, there's some good ones in there. You know that. There's some people you'd want to carry your banner. And the truth is, all the oxygen in the room is being taken up by a guy with a comb over, right? Donald Trump he's went up in the polls. How much damage, if any, will that present to you as a party?
Well, I actually told these two standing before we came up on stage, we had 24 million people watch the debate. That is never a bad thing. And on a flip side, between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, it seems like we have a hair care issue with our candidates, because Bernie Sanders is actually leading the polls in New Hampshire as of today, too. So no, I think by bringing more people who aren't used to getting involved into politics and dealing with it, and I think he's also forcing other of our good dynamic candidates to bone up their chops and not give the same bland political answer anymore, and it's really creating an infusion and diversity, not just in his campaign, but in the other campaigns.
If Donald Trump is the nominee of your party, will you be happy?
Will I be happy? I'm at this point in time, it's too early to tell, and a lot of it depends. I will be happy with anybody who's a Republican candidate.
Then let me ask the executive director of your party, who's a woman, after the last week. If Donald Trump is the nominee of your party, will that make you very happy?
It would make me happy that we just have a candidate and someone who's strong and who's going to stand up for the issues. I talked to a friend this morning who said that his wife and a group of her friends were very behind Donald Trump because he is starting a dialogue that no one has started before. And I mean, yes, were his comments about women off color, but I mean, everyone can say off color comments about anyone. So, I mean, he did it on a national stage, but.
Couple of questions, and I'm not sure if I understand this one, but I'll do my best. Given what we learned from the Fox debate, why would we want more? Senator Armstrong.
I actually had the privilege of being at the debate, and I think that obviously when you have, well, first of all, there were 2 debates, and Carly Fiorina did great in the first debate. But when you have 10 candidates on stage, you think 2 hours is a lot of time, but it's really not. And so, I mean, there was a little more of the soundbite effect to it, and they were really working. But I thought the questions that were asked and the answers that were given were dynamic, and I think people noticed that, and it got people talking. So, yeah, we want as many debates as possible. We have a dynamic and diverse field, man. We want them to keep moving forward.
Let's reverse the question. Let's ask it this way. And let's use front runners, because who knows where we're going to be a year from now. But I'll ask the Democrats what they fear most about a Trump presidency, and I'll ask the Republicans what they fear most about a Hillary presidency, okay? So you each get a chance to take your shot. Go ahead, Kelly.
I don't have a very strong positive taste for Donald Trump. I'll be quite frank about that. I think he's got some good ideas, and they're right in that he's brought forward some discussions and some ideas that we haven't been willing to talk about openly and honestly. I think that's as far as his candidacy goes. I think he's going to continue to bring up those issues and he's going to get people talking, but I don't think he's a serious candidate right now in the fact that he won't be someone who can come forward, work across the aisle, work with Congress, work with his agencies to move the country forward. I don't see him being a serious contender in the international field, being able to work with people across the globe. I don't see him being a respectable candidate and president that will be someone that we can all be proud of as president.
And let's get your take, Mr. Chairman or Madam Executive Director, as your thoughts on Hillary Clinton.
I mean, it's great to have a woman who's running for president. I will not deny that. But the fact of the matter is Hillary has given no reason for the American public to trust her, whether it's the emails, whether it's Benghazi. And yes, these are issues that keep coming up and they're continually resurrected, but that's because we haven't had any answers and no one has addressed these questions, whether it be Hillary, her campaign staffers, or whomever. But I mean, I think there is a serious trust issue, and your president is someone that you need to be able to trust and trust that they're making the right decisions for the country and moving us forward.
I'm going to jump on one here. It says, is political correctness destroying our country? And I'm going to direct this to you, Madam Executive Director. And the reason, Roz, I'm doing that is because you said everybody has an off day or says offhanded comments. I can tell you, as a husband and a father of 2 daughters, they didn't quite take it as that. They took it more serious. But I'm curious what you think about that. Is that the appeal of the Donald? The fact that, you know what the hell, I'm just going to let it fly.
I would say destroying our country is a pretty severe term or a strong term to use. I do think that he has brought to light a lot of issues that people haven't been willing to talk about, and people have been dancing around, whether that be politicians, whether it be voters, whether it be celebrities. I mean, across the country, people just do not like to talk about those issues, and I think it's only hurting the country, and it's hurting the politics of the country, and it's hurting, honestly, the kids who are being brought up in this world, because now there are such things as trigger warnings, and we aren't able to talk about things, and people don't have to read books or whatever it may be because they aren't willing to be exposed to different things. And I think that more so is going to hurt the country.
Tyler, I want to give you a chance to answer, then I got another question to follow up with.
Sure. You know, I think in this day and age, especially when it comes to politics, almost every phrase has been pulled to no end to where you know exactly what you're supposed to say, what gets the best reaction. I think I saw a question on the board earlier. Somebody had sent in, since when did the term revenue replace taxes? Because it's political correctness, and that's what's been pulled. And I think that sometimes is what is drawing people that haven't been involved in politics towards Trump. I can point to my friends that I grew up with in Leeds, North Dakota, that they voted, but they, for some reason, are jumping on, at least he goes out and says it. I agree with Roz, destroying the country is a strong word. Sometimes I also think we just need to lighten up a little bit. I don't think everything is as offensive as it is portrayed in the media and all that, but yeah, I think we can take a step back every now and then and just have an open, honest dialogue.
Wait a second.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sorry. With all due respect, Tyler, you're my friend, but when you start accusing a woman asking you tough questions of having her period, that's wrong. Can we admit that's wrong? That's wrong.
I completely agree. I mean, if we're
Not
talking about that
anti-political
specific,
correct.
if we're talking about that specific comment, yeah, that's one that crosses that line. But there are a number of examples of things that I don't think have crossed the line that people have raised up in the media, whether it was social media, that, well, this is offensive, and all of a sudden you have that groundswell of people that are highly offended by it, and they just kind of feed off of each other.
Senator Armstrong, this is for you. One of the things that's really just got an unbelievable amount of play as of late, at least over in Fargo, is the idea of the refugee resettlement program, immigration being obviously a big conversation right now, sanctuary cities. Would the Republican Party in 2016, because Wyoming's not part of the refugee resettlement program, would you guys come out and try to find candidates or at least be proponents of pulling North Dakota out of the refugee resettlement program?
I actually have not spent very much time on that particular issue, but I do have some knowledge about immigration. My wife is a legal immigrant from Oslo, Norway, so this transcends, a lot of different things. Illegal immigration is a problem in this country. If you want to talk about the one thing that Donald Trump has touched a nerve on, it is the immigration issue in the United States. And it's obviously coming close to home now here in Fargo. And yes, we need to be able to deal with those situations, and we need apparently longer notice than we knew we had to have those people here. But at the same time, if they are refugees and if they are people from other places, the American dream is here, but I am not really tied up specifically on that issue. I'd have
Kylie,
to
I want to get your thoughts on it, because obviously a lot of people that talk about the refugee resettlement program, the illegal immigration that's taken place, say, oh my gosh, here's a great, because if you look at the stats, like for example in 2012, Romney could have won 70% more of the Latino vote, he still doesn't win. He gets 4% more of the white vote, he ends up becoming our next president. So people allude to the fact that, well, hey, if you guys go out and have these refugees come in and legal immigration, they just become Democrat voters. What do you say to that?
I think the reason that we want to bring refugees to North Dakota isn't because they're going to vote for Democrats. I think it's because they add to our thriving economy and they create unique diversity in our state. I've worked with the refugees in Grand Forks. I've done English tutoring and some different programs with Lutheran Social Services there. I would encourage anyone to become involved with those programs and volunteer and get to know the people that want to come here and make a life. The young woman that I was working with worked very hard every day. She worked at a hotel in town. Her husband worked at the UND campus. And they're trying hard to make it. So for us to say, no, go away, we don't want you, I think is disrespectful and hurtful to our economy.
So the big conversation that happened for us on social media was, so what do you say to the homeless vet?
I'm sorry, say that again?
So what do you say to the homeless vet? Here you are putting energy, resources, time into this refugee, and we've got homeless vets in our country.
I think, Chris, that we have enough resources, if we allocated them wisely, that we could help all of those people. I don't think helping one person has to come at the detriment to another person, especially in a state that is doing so well. We've certainly got the nonprofit and the government programs to help people who need a hand up. To homelessness, we could go on and on about what that looks like in our state and how we can help that, but I don't think, like I said, that helping one person has to be at the detriment of someone else.
I want to go back to one of the key issues for GNDC last time, which was Common Core. And those were issues that you all had to deal with. The Democrats supported Common Core, supported a Republican superintendent of public instruction who supported Common Core. There were Republicans who supported Common Core. And yet the opposition seemed to take up all the oxygen in the room. They were very vocal. And that came from the Republican Party. Chairman Armstrong, are you comfortable with where we're going with education and our standards in North Dakota? And is your caucus?
I think there's a division within the Republican Party on Common Core. There's going to continue to be a division in the Republican Party on Common Core, and and we will debate the issue and we will deal with the issue. My personal feelings on education are, as a party, I will support the party position and the party platform from we didn't have to vote on it in the Senate, so it didn't, I mean, by the time we got it, we supported the education. But we've increased K through 12 funding, we've increased higher ed funding. I think education's moving forward in the right direction, but no, I mean, Common Core is going to be an issue for us. It's going to continue to be an issue for us, and we'll have a vigorous debate about it and treat both sides with respect.
There also was a question that came up that I put in my mental notebook here that North Dakota, through a piece of legislation, actually didn't go as far as a Republican-controlled Supreme Court went when it came to gay rights. And it was about marriage. It was about whether or not people can be married, obviously. But there was legislation introduced last legislative session that when it came to housing, when it came to the workplace, you cannot discriminate against the gay community. Is the Republican Party ever going to get behind that legislation and allow that legislation to pass so that they have the same safety net? Because right now, by law, if I rented an apartment, I could look an individual who's gay and say, I'm not going to rent to you because you're gay, and be well within my legal rights. Will the Republican Party fix that?
I think the Republican Party, as well as everybody in this room, doesn't believe in discriminating against people. I think the difference is our answer isn't creating another protected class and creating more government regulation and intrusion into the business environment. But the best social welfare program is a good economy and a good job. And I can tell you, I live in one of the most conservative districts in North Dakota. And it doesn't matter what color of your skin you have, or where you, or who you choose to hang out with, or who you choose to be with. If you come to Western North Dakota and you work hard and show up for work, you will have a job, you will have a place to live. Our answer is more government is not the solution to this problem.
But by law, I can't stop you from renting my apartment because you're black. But I can because you're gay. How is that right then? You're acting as though we're putting a protected class in place when in fact, we've already done that in many other cases. Why separate out this community?
Well, I mean, if you're asking me, I personally believe that protected classes are not needed and we don't need to increase government in that manner anymore. I think it's bad for business. I think the third-party accommodation is bad for business, and I think those things move forward. I also think society is moving in the direction the movement wants them to go anyway, and I'm not entirely convinced that we need more regulation for it.
And I'd like the Democrats to speak to that as well. Kylie?
Absolutely, Joel. The non-discrimination legislation this session is 2279. Obviously, the Democratic Party fully supported that legislation. I think we maybe had one legislator who hadn't supported it. I don't think it's a matter of regulation. I think it's a matter of protection and ensuring that everybody in North Dakota has a place to live and has a right to their job. The chamber has supported, the North Dakota Chamber has supported that legislation in the past. I think they strategically chose to stay out of that fight because their hands were full this session. It's a matter of human rights. It's one more class isn't going to overload our regulatory system. Now that we have gay marriage, we have the right to marry in the entire country, someone shouldn't be fired for getting married and then going home to their apartment, getting kicked out, being fired from their job because of who they love. And the Democratic Party stands behind that. We always will. I hope that our Republican counterparts can come across and see that that's important. We like to bury our heads in the sand sometimes and say it's not happening here. We had a number of young people come forward and testify publicly during that debate and say, I was kicked out of my housing, I was fired from my job, and the only thing I could point to was my sexual orientation, and that's wrong. That's not how we treat people in North Dakota.
Senator Armstrong, just for clarity, you said you don't believe in any protected class, or did I hear
No,
that right?
I don't agree in expanding it to the LGBT.
Got it. Let's go back to some kind of conservative principles, if you will, and I want to hear your thoughts on, how do I want to frame this? So Medicaid expansion. We all thought, okay, this is going to be great, it's going to be okay. Now we find out it's up 182% more than we anticipated. Yes, more people are being insured, which we hopefully is going to be good for our premiums. But at the end of the day, in 2017, we've talked about the legacy fund with Joel. The state's now going to have to take over the Medicaid. Where are we going to get that money from since we're taking up 80% of the schools, and will we have the money to take care of that? And was it the right decision to expand Medicaid?
Do you want to?
You guys were the legislators.
I mean, as a party, our governor supported it. As a senator, I didn't vote for it. So my personal opinion on this matter, I think I have to go with that. And I didn't think it was the right choice then, and I think it's
So
an
are we
issue we're
stuck
gonna deal
now with
going
2017 having to pay that as a state, or is there any other way we can not have to pay it as a state?
I think we'll have to look at the issues and move forward as we get into the legislative session.
I was actually on the Human Services Committee that heard that, and I actually want to thank the North Dakota Chamber for coming in and supporting that bill, knowing the impact, the positive impact that's going to have on our hospitals that are now still seeing those people that we're paying through emergency room visits, etc. As far as being able to afford that, the way the Medicaid expansion is slowly the federal share of that will drop down, but I don't think it gets below 90%. Of course, that raises the issue of federal debt, and that's another conversation. But in that bill, because there was concern, there was a sunset clause, meaning in the upcoming legislative session, we will be taking up Medicaid expansion again. But I would surely hope that we do not eliminate that now that these individuals that have benefited from new insurance coverage, we're not going to tell them that they are no longer eligible to see a doctor. So. Was a little disheartened to see the dramatic increase, but what it shows is that people needed that coverage and they are using it. So I think it's good for those individuals.
This one goes directly to the chairman of the Democratic Party. If there truly is a Dem-NPL party and they're a force in North Dakota, you say you're going to focus on legislative races. Some of us might take that as a cop-out that you can't get candidates to run for the legislative races or the executive races. Last time you nominated an attorney general candidate that didn't campaign. If you truly are a party, where are your candidates? Do you have people ready to run for these offices?
I would say yes, Joel. Obviously, I'm not going to start throwing out names of people we've been in conversation with, but we have been recruiting candidates since before the last session started. We're working hard to find people who are willing to step up. As I said before, does that mean we're going to win every race? Absolutely not. I couldn't say that with a straight face, but I hope that we'll be able to pick up a few seats in the legislature. It's not a cop-out. I think we realize where our opportunities are at. Right now, it might not be in our statewide races, and that's okay. We've got a lot of opportunities to really shape policy discussions by adding more seats in the legislature.
Rank has its privilege. We're going to let the two chairmen have the closing comments. We'll begin with the minority party because the majority party then earns the right to counter. How's that? Fair enough? Fair enough. So, Kylie, closing comments from the Democratic side.
Thanks, Joel. And I'm going to end on a cordial note. I saw one of the questions that popped up and a couple things about having young people on the stage, and you're glad to see that, and you wonder if we're more willing as young people to work across the aisle and work together to move the state forward. I would say absolutely. Coming into the legislature in 2013, I was only 23 years old. And I came, and that year we had more young people than we've ever had in the legislature, and that was exciting across the aisle. And we do work well together, and we get to know each other, and we spend time together. And I think that only serves the people of North Dakota better, and it serves people well. And I think the more that we can step across the aisle and work together, the better we are all off. So thank you to the Chamber for hosting this and for having us up here today, and I look forward to continuing this conversation into the next year.
Chairman Armstrong.
Yeah, I agree. No, I get along very well with both people on stage. Sometimes I think they're misguided, but I get along very well with them. I'm gonna end this with a story, and this is a true story, and very few people in this room have heard this, but this is the story of North Dakota, and this is the story of Republican leadership. I have a friend in Dickinson, North Dakota. He will become a sophomore in college at UND. So he's brilliant, electrical engineer, so he gets done, and 20 years ago he would have never looked to stay in North Dakota in school. Now he's going to Grand Forks. He is going to the Petroleum Engineering School in Grand Forks. This summer he comes back and he gets a scholarship from a couple North Dakota agencies, and he's working for an international oil company doing an internship for $30 an hour in Western North Dakota. He will go back, he will graduate from University of North Dakota, and now when he is done, we will have a young, dynamic, North Dakota grown and raised individual who have the opportunity to stay in the state and work in an incredibly compelling in the energy field, but it goes from Dickinson to Grand Forks. Local companies offer scholarship, multinational companies that are now doing business here. And if Republicans stay on that message and we continue to promote those kind of policies and ideas, we will be fine in 2016.
All I want to say is I cannot thank you enough, and Joel, I want to speak for you, but I wonder if you and I can do this every week. This is as much fun as it gets for Joel and I come up here and take a few shots at you guys. So thank you very much for coming up here. If we can give him a big round of applause, please. All right, we are going to take a poll, I presume. So Tom will do that. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, it's my specialty, I guess. We'll give you guys a little bit of a break. Thanks again to our panelists. someone had mentioned that they felt a little uneasy in the crowd, so it's good to have you guys on the hot seat a little bit, I guess. Time now for that poll question. Who has a better vision for North Dakota, the Republicans or the Democratic-NPL Party? Republicans, GNDC 13. Democrats, GNDC 14. If you think the independents do, it's 15. None of the above is GNDC 16. We'll give you a little bit of time to text in your response, the keyword, and 22333. So one of the GNDC numbers to the number 22333. Just a quick break, and we're going to bring Joel right back up here for our fourth panel discussion of the afternoon. And it's been talked about a little bit. It was talked about last fall. It's been talked about for decades, and that's going to be trying to find a solution for higher education. So cast your votes, and we'll get going here again in just a moment.